yeah, that was my day of working with another Palestinian woman. And honestly, I was shaken. It was one of those days where I was shaken to my core because I told my wife, had it been a neo-Nazi wearing a swastika on the shirt, coming in and saying all the typical stuff that Nazis say, I don't think I would have been fazed at all. I don't think I would have been fazed in the slightest. I would have laughed. But just how normal this, like the conversation leading up to these things were, it was something else.
He believed what millions of people believe about Israel. He saw himself on the right side, the moral side. But then October 7th happened. And what shocked him wasn't just the attack, it was the reaction. People he knew, people he respected, were celebrating. That's when everything started to fall apart. Today, he's completely flipped his views and even converted to Judaism. So the question is, what did he see that most people still refuse to see? Robert George, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You said that October 7th didn't affect you at first. Do you think that's how most people felt?
I think, the Jewish community felt it obviously right away. I honestly am not sure, but for me, it did take a little while to set in. But I do know, I have spoken to some people that when October 7th did happen, they looked at it as a tragic event. And this ultimately mirrors what happened to me. They looked at it as a tragic event, but it was a tragic event on the other side of the globe. But it set off a series of events in their own lives, as it did in mine, that led to the full impact being felt in full later on.
Do you think that most people that were supporting Palestine back then or even today actually understand what they're supporting? Did you understand what you were supporting back?
The short answer is no, I did not. And the reason why is because I think a lot of people have a very basic view of the conflict or a view of the conflict that has been largely informed by the oppressor versus oppressed mindset, where they see what they see when they see that footage, not of October 7th, but footage from Judea and Samaria prior to October 7th, where they see, Israeli soldiers, doing their patrols, and then they see, Palestinians with their heads hung low. And it's often portrayed like you would see in fiction, it's reminiscent of things like Star Wars, where the good guys are always the ones that are, ragtag, poor, where they have, less resources, they're less able to assemble themselves. And then they're fighting this evil empire, which is wearing, matching uniforms. I think they come off of that kind of way of thinking. And they just haven't taken the time to really delve into the conflict. And if they have taken the time to look past like a YouTube video or a meme on Facebook, then don't think they go very deep in their research on that topic.
When you saw people celebrating October 7th, did something feel off about that to you?
Yes, I did. Like you said in the introduction, a lot of people, it shocked me the way people reacted to it, because a lot of people that I know that I had believed were smart, intelligent, caring people, what I witnessed was this huge black hole of empathy, where these are the same people that can, mourn when anything happens to anyone, anywhere in the world. But when it came to Israelis, it was almost as if in their mind, the Israelis deserved nothing, because in a lot of their minds, every single Israeli, regardless of what they believed and pushed for, was a white colonizer. They were buying fully into those tropes about, white colonizers. So, yeah.
Now, before all of this, you believed that you were on the right side, I guess, morally, correct? So what did that mean to you, being on the right side?
What it meant to me is that I thought I saw a group of people being oppressed by another country or being occupied by another country that had no right to be there, or was at least overstepping what they should have been allowed to do as a country. So I very much looked at it in the same way that probably a lot of, pro-Pali still look at it today, where it is, I saw it as a almost like a foreign entity occupying. I did in later years come to realize the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So it wasn't like I saw them as people without a connection, but I did see it as people abusing their power. But like I said, that was before, I did my own research into the topic.
Do you think that that's why people hold on to these beliefs so strongly, because they're looking at this from like an emotional way instead of thinking about it, looking at the facts? Do you think that that's the problem that we have?
Absolutely. I do think emotion plays a huge role in it. And I also think it comes down to that, that oppressor versus oppressed kind of mindset, which has its own, that's its own rabbit hole. But I do think it is a much more emotional position for most of them. I have interacted with some people that do have a more intellectual foundation for what they're saying and their understanding of the topic. And I disagree with them fully, but those people are very few and very far between. I think most people that I've ever interacted with, it is an emotional topic, and that is what drives their thinking on it.
You described something called the Star Wars mindset, that people think that they're like the rebels fighting the Empire. Could you
Mhm.
explain that?
Sure. So, and a lot of times when we often see Hamas, Hezbollah, and all these groups, they're often portrayed as the resistance. And when we talk about a lot of fiction, like Star Wars, for example, there's an innate desire in all of us to want to root for the underdog. There's this innate desire that we will see the little guys succeed. So when you see when if you know nothing about what you're talking about and you know nothing about the conflict and you're seeing just the war footage, Hamas doesn't wear uniforms in battle. So you do see plainclothes people looking like they're carrying out some sort of heroic resistance if you do not know what you are looking at. And I think that plays very much into that Star Wars Hunger Games kind of into those kinds of stories. And where it gets a little bit deeper is that I do think that believing that siding with an oppressed people, it does give people their own form of meaning.
So, in your mind back then, there were the good guys and the bad guys. At what point did that story stop making sense for you?
The story stopped making sense after October 7th because generally what was happening, like where my mind was for at least like a month or two, was I was still what you would call pro-Palestinian. I was still supporting Palestine on paper. However, I looked at what Hamas had done on October 7th and I was trying to understand why people were supporting it or writing off the atrocities they committed. And over time is really that's what, caused caused the change when I was saying, "Hey guys, I still support Palestine over Israel, but I don't understand why we can't be against what Hamas did." And just over time, just I had so many nasty, nasty interactions with people that I thought were, decent people.
Why do you think that is, that pro-Palestinians cannot condemn what Hamas does? I mean, does that kind of fall away from their narrative if they condemn Hamas? How do you explain that?
Okay, so let's talk about the oppressor versus oppressed mindset. In the oppressor versus oppressed mindset, the oppressed can do no wrong, and the oppressor, they can do no right. So any action that the oppressed commits, that action is a reaction to anything the oppressor has done. So what that means in this context is that even if these people can admit to the atrocities that Hamas committed, those atrocities are still going back to Israel. It's still blamed on Israel in a kind of circular way where basically it can come down to them saying, well, okay, yeah, Hamas did what they did, but what about the 77 years of occupation before that? So it gives them a way out of condemning Hamas simply because in this mindset, the oppressed actually has no kind of agency at all. And everything that they do, like I said, goes right back onto who these people deem the oppressor. And the oppressor can do no right either, by the way. There is absolutely nothing they can do that would be worthy of any kind of praise or admiration.
And it's interesting that even the things that happened on October 7th, they will deny. Either they'll say
Mhm.
that it was an inside job, they'll say, it didn't really happen the way we said it did. Women were really not raped, all these different things. They'll try to downplay it. Did you
And I
find that?
think that I think they're trying to, before they realize they actually have to address it, I do think they're trying to put up those stop gaps of saying it didn't happen or it wasn't as bad as they said it was they're going to pull out all those stops. But eventually it does get to a point where they do have to admit that it happened. And that is when it's going to be tossed right back onto Israel.
Now, what's the biggest lie that you believed about Israel? And maybe you could speak about that. And what
Okay, so the
finally
biggest
exploded that?
yeah, so the biggest lie that I believed about Israel was I believed the white colonizer apartheid myth, because this was influenced by just, if you're not really researching the topic and you're just letting, your YouTube algorithm steer you, what am I seeing? I'm seeing, regular looking Palestinians surrounded by Israeli soldiers speaking two different languages. I come from a background where I heard Arabic, so I could hear the difference. And then you have the Israeli soldiers speaking Hebrew, and obviously they're not being super buddy buddy, because the Israeli soldiers have a job to do. So those images reinforce that belief that it was a colonial apartheid state.
Do you think that most people actually want the truth, or just a story that feels good for their narrative?
I definitely think they want a story that feels good for their narrative, because you can show them all the facts you want. You can show them all the documentation you want. You can have them read all the books you want. What I think a lot of them, and I'm talking like upwards of like 70%, what I think a lot of them are actually looking for is they're looking for something to stand by. They're looking for something to fight for. And this is what they have chosen to fight for. So it is an emotional thing.
When you started to question, your beliefs, did you feel like you were risking your relationships?
I actually did risk my relationships, and I lost a lot of those relationships. So in the months that following October 7th, and I started posting more and more about the topic on my own personal Facebook page, which I did not have a Jewish or Zionist audience. In fact, my audience that I spoke to was mostly the progressive left. To give you an idea of where I came from like that 2016 kind of Bernie bro background, Bernie Sanders. So a lot of these relationships, like a lot of people that I knew from high school, a lot of people that I worked with at jobs, a lot of people that I had class with, out of nowhere, I just kept seeing that black hole of empathy. And anytime I tried defending Israel, or at least saying, okay, fine, say what you will about Israel, but let's talk about what Hamas did. All of a sudden it turned into me supporting Zionist propaganda. And I was falling for the lies that Israel was, for all these crimes that Israel was committing. And all of a sudden I'm getting accused of supporting genocide. And, many, many, many people, terminated their relationships with me. Thankfully, like most of my like inner circle of friends stuck around, but I did even have some family members cut me off as well.
Did it surprise you how quickly people turned on you when you spoke about, their real beliefs?
Yes, it's one of those things where I'm still shocked to this day a little bit over it. I'm just so surprised, because again, these are people that I thought were smart people. I thought they were empathetic people. I thought these were people that could, see something bad happening to someone else and have some sort of a heart. Doesn't mean you have to like them or agree with them, but like, hey, this is messed up. But it was shocking, and it was something that was happening for, I want to say it was like a good year and a half. It was a good year and a half where, every couple days, I would wake up to, some sort of direct messages, text messages of people that I knew just going off on me, just going off. And of course, I wake up and I just go right into attack mode. But actually, to this day, all my social media notifications, Facebook, Instagram, all of them, I do not get any push notifications from any social media to my phone. I have to manually check, my Facebook, my Instagram, and my TikTok, because of this experience.
So you're still getting a lot of hate.
It's calmed down. It's calmed down as, eventually I ran out of people that, were wanting to, terminate relations over this. But, it did last for a good long time, because just the way the algorithm works, some people wouldn't see it until later. And I would think every couple months, oh, I guess that's over. I guess that part's over. But then it's like, oh, then someone else just comes out of the blue, and it's like, here we go. And I kind of just brace in. It's like, well, I know how this conversation is going to go. It gets to the point now where I actually have certain citations and certain paragraphs saved into my phone, so I can type part of my responses, copy paste part of it in. Like, I keep entire sections of Hamas's charter in my phone notes at this point.
Wow. Now, how hard is it to admit that you've been publicly wrong? Most people, they hide that, or they just double down. How hard is it to actually publicly come out and say, you know what? the way I was thinking was wrong?
So it wasn't like I didn't come out and say that I was wrong. It was one of those, the way it really happened was I noticed over time my support was shifting for Israel. And then when it came to people calling me out for having a different way of looking at things when I supported Palestine more, and they would ask me, explain yourself. They would want some sort of an explanation. And I would just say, I looked at it this way, and now I look at it this way, and and it wasn't really that hard for me. And I think I come from a background in sales. I spent some time in sales, and if there's anything I learned, it's easier just to admit you were wrong and move past it. So I never really dwelt on me being wrong before. It's just, this is my position now. I have more evidence to support my position. I've spent time reading into this position. This is what I support now, and I know I was saying something a couple years ago, but this is where my research has led me.
Now, you grew up around Islam. Could you explain
Yes.
how are you involved? Were you involved with Islam?
So I grew up in a Muslim household, and I converted to Islam at the age of, I want to say it was either 13 or 14. I can never quite remember which one it was. And I was converted by a very well-known sheikh by the name of Sheikh Yusuf Estes. He has his own Wikipedia page. I never really got too deep into learning the religion itself. I know a lot about it now just because of because of the conflict, and just, learning more now. I know a lot about it. But at the time, I only ever got so deep as to learn, Al-Fatiha and half of another verse. And I was never taught how to, pray properly. And it didn't really affect my worldview, because again, I never really absorbed the religion, but I was exposed to a lot of how it influences thinking. I was exposed to a lot of how it shapes the world, around it, really.
What do you think people are afraid to say about Islam? What should they be saying?
I think a lot of people in the United States, in the West in general, they have a very sanitized view of what Islam is, and who Muhammad was. And I can very easily I can tell you what to do in order to see this. There is an author by the name of Karen Armstrong. She wrote a book about Muhammad. And if you ever read this book, it's very much designed and written for a Western audience, where it portrays a much cleaner version. But if you go back and read the original sources, such as Ibn Ishaq, Al-Tabari, and you read those sources, a very different picture emerges. And that picture that emerges is a man who lived in the 7th century, and he was living in his environment. He was what he believed he was a prophet, but he was also a warlord, and he acted like it. He acted like a 7th century warlord, as would be expected of him in that environment. But he is often in the West, he's reformed into this kind of like this reluctant warrior, which he absolutely was not. And I think a lot of people are just afraid to cross the chasm and actually seeing what Islam is really about. And something that we'll often see when people talk about it is, you'll see a lot of these verses referenced. You'll see a lot of these verses referenced where it says, oh, you have your religion, I have my religion. And it's often portrayed as being very compatible with the religions around it. However, if you actually read those verses in context, there is a doctrine in Islam called abrogation. And with that in mind, what I would tell everyone to do is, if you're going to read one verse of the Quran, it is to read verse 9, Surah 9, the sword. And that is the chapter that says, go out and fight the disbeliever wherever you may find them. That, because of the doctrine of abrogation, what it's doing is it is abrogating any verse that came before it that contradicts it. So those verses about you have your religion, I have mine, which actually comes up in about 2 different places in the Quran, if I'm not mistaken. Those verses are abrogated with that command to go and conquer. So I don't think people want to face that, but I also think the allure of Islam in the West is the fact that it is not a it is not a Western based religion. I think that plays very much into it's almost like a form of exoticism, where the people that are least knowledgeable about it but are also defending it the most. I think it's something about it not being a product of the West, which gives it its appeal.
Do you think that Islam and the modern Western values can truly coexist, or is that a contradiction?
I do believe that at its basic core, I do believe it is a contradiction. That being said, this is where I often make a little bit of a disclaimer that, I criticize Islam. I have a lot of feelings on the religion. But one thing that I genuinely have a fear of as well is, saying things that could cause bigotry against people that were born in it. And regardless of their level of observance, that's their what they were raised with. That's what they know. And I don't like the idea of people being targeted because of their religion. Now, that being said, every religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and all the other ones, there's, the surface level. You have like your cafeteria Christians, or you have your Jews who only go to the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You have your Muslims who only go in during Friday prayers, maybe a couple times for, Ramadan. But if you go deeper into Islam, if you really start digging into what a lot of these texts say, that is where you're going to find a lot of the issues that make it very difficult for it to coexist with the religions around it. And one thing you can do is simply go to, Quran.com and look at you could probably find like a list of the verses that a lot of people want to refer to when it comes to, what the Quran says. But don't just read the verses. Also read what's called the Tafsir, and read the Tafsir by Ibn Kathir. For a Jewish audience, Ibn Kathir is to the Quran what Rashi is to the Torah. He's a leading commentary. I think they lived within like 100 years of each other too. And he will really go into detail and just kind of say the things out loud that a lot of people are accusing the Quran of saying, but doesn't quite say explicitly. It is a lot of Ibn Kathir's commentary that will add in things like you cannot befriend the Christians and the Jews, where he goes after, what the Christians believe. So at its core, I don't think it is compatible if someone chooses to go really deep into that religion.
Now, going back to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, do you believe that this conflict is really about land, or is it something much deeper, like religion?
I think it's about religion now. I do think earlier in the conflict, as right around 1948, was more about land, with religion as being more of a side factor. When you get into Sinai War, the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, that I think the primary ideological factor there was actually Arab nationalism, which came to an end. It really came to an end after the 6-Day War, but the Yom Kippur War was kind of the epilogue to that. And ever since, groups like Hamas came into existence, they are the ones that have really brought the religious part of it to the fore. As Hezbollah, Hamas, that is where I think where this conflict really took a religious turn, because I'm sure you've read Hamas's charter. It's very motivated by a lot of Islamic teachings. It quotes the Sahih al-Muslim hadith that talks about fighting the Jews in the last day, and the Jews will hide behind the Gorkad tree, and the other Jews will say, Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. I think that now it's a religious thing. I think land has always been there, but I think it went from being more of a nationalist war to a religious war now.
Now we're seeing influential voices that the millions of people trust, repeating the same beliefs that you used to have. Why do you think that's happened?
So for the higher up people, like a lot of these pro-Palestine influencers, I'm sure to a degree, they've basically bought it from themselves and they do believe it. I do think a very tiny amount of them might be a little sincere, but I do think it comes down to a lot of it comes down to emotion, and they're probably making money off of it. They're exposed to an audience. And, one note, at least for me, is that some people have accused me, like people that have known me have accused me of taking the stances that I have and taking the positions that I have for clicks and views. And in my mind, at least in my mind, if I was in this whole thing for clicks and views, it's the pro-Palestinian side that has the audience. They're the ones that have, millions of more people that are supportive of that. So that's where the clicks and views would be. And I think that's what a lot of them are motivated by. It is an easy cause just to get a lot of people to follow you without really doing that much research, because of how much the portrayal of the oppressor versus oppressed, just because of how easy, for whatever issues come with it, for how easy that model is to get in your head and really just base everything off of moving forward.
Yeah, you have people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly. They completely flipped on their views. Like you said, do you think they believe what they're saying, or they're following their audience? It's making them more money, so let's just follow that.
I think they are following their I think they're following their audience. I think these people are following their audience because it gives them something spicy to say that'll show up in the sound bites and the sound clips. It gives them a point of contrast against Trump, who is, more supportive of Israel. So it creates a buzz, it creates a media, and that's what a lot of people I think are reacting to. Whether it's positively or negatively, it's still a reaction. Whereas I think in an alternate universe, if they were to take a more traditionally pro-Israel position, it really wouldn't stand out much.
Yeah. Now, you didn't just change your views, you changed your identity. Why did you pick Judaism, and what did Judaism give you that nothing else did?
So let me answer the first part. So why Judaism, how Judaism, like why did I choose Judaism? And it was because early on in the conflict, as part of my journey in understanding the conflict, I realized I didn't understand Judaism. I didn't understand much more about it than it had no New Testament. It had no Jesus, and they wore hats. That was my understanding of what Judaism really was. And then, as I was going into this research, that's when I discover, Tovia Singer's videos. And Tovia Singer, one thing he really helped me with was deconstructing a lot of very Christian assumptions about God and theology that I had and why these things were not making sense in my head. I couldn't understand, things like the Trinity. I couldn't understand things like the Immaculate Conception. I couldn't understand, like, none of that stuff made sense to me. And then I listened to Tovia Singer's explanations, and that really solved a lot of those issues. But it goes a step further than that. Tovia Singer, in a lot of different contexts, what he'll say is often when he's explaining something is, don't take my word for it, go and read it. Don't take my word for it. Don't trust what I'm saying. Open it up, pick whatever translation you want and read it for yourself. And there was just something about that where it was, read the words on the page. What is it saying at its most basic level? Just read it in context. What does it say that came before? What does it say? What does the sentence before it say? What does the sentence that came after it say? What does the whole chapter say? What does everything say in context? And it gave me this, well, it made me a lot more inquisitive, actually. It made me a lot more eager and wanting to learn more about Judaism. And one thing that I think some people that know me both either from my online presence or they know me from in person is that I'm pretty sure many people probably think I converted to Judaism because of my support of Israel. And I get it. I really, really do. But those tracks were parallel. They were parallel. It was not a case of where I converted to Judaism because I support Israel. So what Judaism gave me was, in the world we live in today, it can get pretty difficult. And honestly, in my own head, life was getting, I was going through a bit of an existential crisis because, this is going on about, what's going on with my identity, what's going on with everything I believe, especially in the months following October 7th. I put every belief of mine that I had under a microscope. And I realized that there were things missing. And one thing that Judaism really provided me, aside from, restoring a belief in God, which obviously is, really, really important, it really gave me a structure to follow. It gave me an almost a spiritual clarity because of, and the way I want to say this, and I know a Jewish theologian would probably lose their mind if I say this, but Jewish theology it's simple. Now, I know that you can go really into the weeds when it comes to the theology, but compared to a lot of the theological labyrinths of Christianity, it's easy to at least get your head around, even if, the journey into it can go very, very, very deep.
Now, I just want to clarify your timeline. So you went from Christianity to Islam around 13, 14, right? And then from when did you convert out of Islam to Judaism? Like at what age?
Sure. Okay, so I was born Catholic. I converted to Islam around 13, 14 years old. I was only in the religion for 3 years, and I had a very, very negative relationship with Islam. It actually did a lot to darken my worldview because of what that religion beliefs. So I did eventually convert back to Christianity when I was about 17 or 18 years old. A friend of mine, we jumped into like a community pool and he, rebaptized me. But within the years after that, I became one of those super hardcore atheists. I don't know if I don't know if you remember the years when Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, when they were at like the height of the game, you couldn't get away from them on the internet. So I spent many years, and that is where I really spiritually deadened myself, because I was one of those, oh, if you believe in God, this is, it's nonsense. It's dumb. How could you believe this? Because, science is everything. And why do you need spirituality at all? But you can only maintain that kind of momentum for so long. And it was in my mid to late 20s where I started getting curious about Christianity again. But when I went back into Christianity, I was actually looking into Orthodox Christianity. I checked out, Mormonism. I even went into a Scientology place once. But I started exploring Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and it didn't click. It was the closest out. Eastern Christianity resolves some issues that I had with Christianity as a whole, particularly in regards to how it looks at the Immaculate Conception, how it looks at how the Trinity works. And like, there's some things that made a little bit more sense than, like Roman Catholicism. But I was only like one step further and it still wasn't there. So eventually I stopped going. So I spent another couple years kind of wandering spiritually. And then my conversion after October 7th, I started getting interested in Judaism the following January, February. I bought a Tanakh. I read it all the way through. And when I read the Tanakh all the way through, what I did was I put aside, I forgot everything I knew about Jesus. And I was like, let me just read this and just put all that out of my mind. And what I found was that the Tanakh told a very, very different story when you remove that Christological lens. So, it took me a couple months to get through that. And then I finally had my first meeting with a rabbi in September of 25, but I didn't actually start attending. No, it was September of 24. It was September of 24. And then I started going in February of 25. And, I was studying Judaism this entire time. And it was in this past January where I completed the process and I went into the mikvah.
You said that Judaism gave you responsibility instead of victimhood. Can you
hmm
explain that?
So, yes, the way I looked at Judaism was that, and I guess the easiest way to do this would be to compare it to Christianity, where, you're always, you ask, God, Jesus, for help, where and something that I've always seen is, when people are just praying and praying and praying for help to come. And then what Judaism taught me is you have to get up and, do it yourself, whether it be, you have to teach yourself the thing, you have to physically do the thing, and God will give you the strength, but you're the one that has to put your foot forward, and you're the one that has to actually make that effort. And you can draw on that well of strength, but you still have to be the one actively doing it.
Now, at what point did you start to do your, activism for Israel on your, different social media platforms?
So Facebook almost right away, because I've always been that kind of person that runs his mouth on the internet, regardless of who agrees or disagrees with me. So that part of it surprised no one. So I was doing just like Facebook, like little Facebook essays. And then that was when I was going through the period where I was waking up to, a lot of, hate messages, a lot of, people severing relations. And then I started working my first teaching job. And just between classes, I was writing these little quick essays, just trying to like square other things I believed with, me supporting Israel. And so that's where I kind of put it together mentally. And then it was in August of 2024. So it was before I met with the rabbi. In August of 2024 was when I just started filming videos on TikTok. And that was when I started gaining a following, because in the months leading up to that, I had been going on TikTok and following a lot of Israeli Jewish creators. I was following a lot of Israeli Jewish creators, and I put out a couple videos and I woke up the next day and they were all following me back. And that was a phenomenal feeling. And that's when I realized, okay, I have something that I can contribute to this. And so I just every day at one point I was putting out like 3 or 4 videos a day. And often it was often reacting to a lot of current events or something I found interesting about Judaism. Sometimes I would do those videos just several in a row, just addressing those different things. And, people gravitated towards it.
And what was the feedback like? Did people like personal message you about your content?
Yes, I actually received yeah, of course I got hate mail from people I didn't know, but that never bothered me. I received a lot of direct messages from both Jews and Israelis just expressing the most utmost gratitude. They were just expressed just like, thank you for standing with us. So many people have abandoned us. So many people have turned their backs on us. And just to see, because, I wasn't Jewish yet. I guess they saw something really special in the fact that somebody who was non-Jewish at the time was really just running his mouth on the internet, just going full throated in support of the Jewish people, especially not even just because of what was happening in the war in Gaza itself, but also because of what was starting to happen around the world, and it just became socially acceptable to say to Jews in so many different contexts, and just a lot of people expressed a lot of gratitude for that.
And how did it make you feel that, here you are, a non-Jew at that point, speaking about Israel, standing up for Israel, and that's considered like something that's rare, something that's most people wouldn't do. Like, how did that feel like for you?
It felt really it was vindicating. It was vindicating. It really was, because at no point when I chose to support Israel, at no point did I ever feel like I chose the wrong side. I knew I was picking. If you go purely by, opinion polls and all that, I was picking what I knew was definitely the less popular position, but it was a position based off of, principles. It was a position based on research. And that was very, very validating to me because, just it wasn't just like, hey, I really appreciate things you do. Like, I got plenty of those and I was absolutely grateful for those. But like I was getting, messages like this long just thanking me to the stars. And it was really a sign to me that I was saying what I should have been saying and doing what I should have been doing.
Now, a lot of people say that Israel's losing the PR war,
Mhm.
but do you think that Israel could ever win the PR war? Is this stacked against them? What do you feel about that?
I think it is stacked against them because if there's anything I've learned about being involved with the Jewish community, if there's anything I've learned about being involved with knowing Israelis, is that Israelis and Jews really love their research and they really love their facts. And unfortunately, a lot of times those don't tell a story that is easily consumable by the masses. I do think that the PR front is just one area that I think Israel is just so deep in the hole that it's really hard to come back from that. It's an uphill battle. It's really an uphill battle. And think of it like, imagine trying to explain the complexities of this conflict to a layperson. You and I are people that like to read a lot, so we could probably process, complicated or excuse me, complex information much easier. But a lot of people just living their daily lives, it's a lot easier to explain. There's a military power in this area and people are fighting them off versus, okay, so there's this really complicated historical thing going on, and we have to, really look at, who did what in this situation. Okay, so there was this one incident that happened, and to explain it accurately from the Israeli point of view, it doesn't have an easy model to just give people that is as simple as the oppressed versus the oppressor.
Yeah, like for example, you see like Piers Morgan, and a lot of times he'll bring on a pro-Israel panelist and anti-Israel panelist. The pro-Israel will give you the facts, the dry
Hmm.
facts. The anti-Israel will give you the emotion. But yeah,
Hmm.
you're babies and this and that. Like, and I feel like, I don't know about you, but the anti-Israel kind of tugs at people's hearts, and that's I don't know, a lot of times that's more effective. What do you think about those debates and the Piers Morgan platform as a whole?
So Piers Morgan's platform is actually a good idea in certain contexts, but kind of in this context, in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whatever you want to call it, because it is such a conflict of emotions and facts, the emotions are always going to win. So I don't think that appearing on Piers Morgan is necessarily the the most effective thing to do, because again, it's going to be facts competing with emotion. But at the same time, if you don't go on Piers Morgan, you're just letting these anti-Israel people just dominate the popular narrative. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you regarding to someone like Piers Morgan.
So, have you ever had any interactions with Palestinians in America, and how have they gone for you?
So I've had I've had two experiences in my life. The first one, several years ago, during about 2018, I was working in a call center, and I was a supervisor, and I had a Palestinian employee that I had a really good relationship with. I was studying Arabic at the time, and it was Al Fusha, so it wasn't like the Levantine dialect. And this individual was really, really helping me out with that. So I was actually having conversations at the desk in Arabic. It wasn't very good, but I could navigate a conversation. And it was actually during this time where where I was starting to like notice some things, because she would she would make jokes about the Jews. Cause, again, like I wasn't Jewish at the time. So I was safe to make those jokes around. And, there were some jokes that were thrown around back and forth. But after October 7th, even though we stayed friends for many years after this, after October 7th, she cut me off real fast because I suggested Hamas was bad, but anyway. But then actually I had a very, very, very recent one. This only happened to me a couple weeks ago. So I worked with a woman. She told me she was from Qatar, but she also told me she was from Palestine. She was from, I want to say it was Ramallah she was from. I had actually met her twice. And the second time was when she actually came to work with me for just one single day. She comes into my classroom because she recognized me. She knew that I had a little bit of a background with having Egyptian family. And so she came into my room, and we were just chit-chatting, and we chit-chatted for about an hour, just about, things things that Judaism and Islam do actually have in common in terms of the theology. And there was actually nothing she said about Jews during that hour-long conversation that actually alarmed me. Looking back on it, she did say some things I should have seen as red flags, but I didn't notice it yet. But at the end of this time, she actually saw my necklace, and it was at the very end of this hour-long break where she asked me, "Do you support Palestine or Israel?" And I looked at her, and I just raised up my necklace. And of course, I had got to hear the whole thing, the spiel about genocide and what do you think about killing kids and all that. And I was just like, I'm not having this like, it was not the place, it was not the time. And I was like, we're not going to have this. We're not going to talk about this right now. And then she was like, what do you think of Bibi Netanyahu? And I looked at her and I was just like, I have complicated thoughts on him. And that was all I said. And she goes, well, what I think is going to happen is the Arabs are going to come in and they're going to kill every Israeli. And then Benjamin Netanyahu they're going to free Palestine. Then they're going to kill Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's going to go to hell. And I'm just staring at her, just like, this is a very weird place to be having this conversation, because we're having kids all around us. It's like, why are you talking about this in a hallway? And so it was about an hour later, lunch break finally came, and she came and sat with me, and the conversation immediately resumed. And she's like, oh, do you think Israel has a right to exist? And I was like, well, yeah. And of course, huffing and puffing through that part of the conversation. And she was huffing and puffing, but at the same time, it was very like normal. Like she was maintaining a very normal composure. And then I finally asked her, like, okay, I understand that Arabs are going to come in, they're going to wipe out the Israelis. And then she corrected me, and she said, no, just the soldiers. I'm like, okay, what happens to the women and children? And she told me that they would be taken hostage and they would be put somewhere safe in like their own little area. And of course, I'm looking at her with my eyebrows to the ceiling at this point. And I said, okay, let's take this a step further. Islam wins. I'm Jewish. What happens to me? And she told me, my choices are I can convert, I can pay the jizya, or I can die. And at that point, she actually whispered that last part because she could tell that this part of the conversation was going probably somewhere where it shouldn't have been going. But of course, and I should have ended the conversation at this point, but it was like I was in too deep. So I asked her, I was like, me, as a Jew, how do you think I feel when I hear this? And she's like, not good. I'm like, okay. So if you're going to try to do this, what do you think we are going to do? And then she paused and she goes, you're going to fight. I'm like, yes, we are. And after that, she shifted the conversation into the Holocaust only having 100,000 victims, which was weird in and of itself. But yeah, that was my day of working with another Palestinian woman. And honestly, I was shaken. It was one of those days where I was shaken to my core, because I told my wife, had it been a neo-Nazi wearing a swastika on the shirt, coming in and saying all the typical stuff that Nazis say, I don't think I would have been fazed at all. I don't think I would have been fazed in the slightest. I would have laughed. But just how normal the conversation leading up to these things were, it was something else.
I appreciate your, courage and bravery for speaking up for the Jewish people. And, your story is very, fascinating to me. and I'm sure it'll resonate with our audience. If people want to, follow you, where could they find you? How could they stay in touch with you?
They can follow me on TikTok under Robert George. And if you look me up, yeah, so TikTok and Facebook are both Robert George. And if you want to find me on Instagram, where if you're somebody that likes to watch like TikTok videos, but you prefer Instagram, then you look me up as The Good McLeach. It's The Good McLeach. And it'll also have, Robert George on it as well. Those are my three main active platforms.
Okay. Thank you again. And wishing you all the best.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.